So, Chris, thanks again for joining us on the Backmarkers F1 show. We had you on last fall in very different circumstances, and it was funny. I was checking the calendar this morning, and I think around this time, if we were in a normal world, you'd be at the Circuit Barcelona de Catalunya, maybe just wrapping up some reports on free practice sessions. So, first off, how are you doing? How are things over there in the UK?
I'm not too bad, thanks. I was in a cafe, wasn't I, last time? I think in
New York.
New York, really, really bad audio for you. So yeah, at least it's a little bit quieter in here. But yeah, very different now. You're right. It would be. I think FP2 would be probably still be going on or just be about to finish. So yeah, I'd be watching long runs in the heat and probably complaining about how boring a Friday practice session is or something like that. But right now it seems like the best thing in the world to do. So yeah, missing it a lot. But no, all good over here really. Like lockdown's not exactly fun, but making the best of it. Got a little garden to get outside when the weather's good like it is today. Been doing a lot of work. So it's not been too bad. I'm one of those who's quite lucky. I work from home when I'm not at races. So that side of it's not so much of a shock to me. It's just the lack of travel in between that's been a bit weird.
Yeah, that's what I was interested in too, because you work as a freelance journalist. I'm sure you got a lot of colleagues who are in similar scenarios. So how has the whole shutdown and lockdown affected the freelance side of the Formula One world? Journalists, camera guys, that sort of thing?
Well, it's funny you should mention camera guys, because I think for photographers it's been a lot harder. They've got nothing to shoot really. A few of them are trying to shoot the eSports events that are going on and kind of seeing if they can make some money that way. But for a lot of them, they're just doing nothing. Their income's dried up and there's nothing for them to go and take photos of. So it's been really tough for them. I actually spoke to one not that long ago who was saying, he was thinking of trying to find ways of diversifying as a photographer, but maybe there's something else he can do so that if this kind of experience happens again or situation happens again, that he's a little bit more protected, because it's been really damaging. For journalists, it's as a freelancer, it's not been too bad. I'm probably down about 50% of my work and income because that's all based at circuits and at races. But then it's not like someone else is taking that from you. So that's kind of on hold until we can get going again. And then I obviously don't have the costs of traveling and flights, accommodation, that sort of thing. And I'm really disorganized normally because as a freelancer, I do lots of different things and say yes to lots of different bits of work. I actually book a lot of things very late. So when we did that last call in and I was in New York, I probably booked the flight to go to the US and Mexico for those two races about 10 days, maybe 2 weeks before actually going. Wow. So I was lucky. I didn't have much that needed cancelling at all. So I wasn't left out of pocket from cancelled flights or hotels. So I've been lucky in that sense. But yeah, the workload's been about 50% in terms of income, but then you ramp it up trying to make sure you're giving everyone enough value for money so that they're going to keep using you. So it's still been very busy, but not too bad.
Yeah, it must be pretty crazy because, you've been in the sport for many years now, and this is probably the most amount of time that you've had off, ever really, from Formula One.
Yeah, it's funny because you say time off, and I understand what you mean, but a lot of people have said this to drivers as well, or anyone who works in F1, being like, you've got all this time off. But of course, you're not off at all. If anything, you're working harder. So like here, it's a bank holiday, so most people are actually having days off today, but I've been working. But that's just being a freelancer, and I don't complain because I get to kind of pick my own hours. So that's actually a bonus to that side of things. But you're right, yeah, I've not spent this long in one country since it'll have been, I think, 2011
Wow.
would have been the last year that I spent this long in one place and didn't get on a plane. So yeah, it's been strange.
Okay, well, one of the main reasons why I wanted to get you on here today was to talk about, obviously, the plans or some of the things in place that for Formula One to possibly return. So I think it was 2 weeks ago or so, Chase Carey put out that they're aiming for July 5th to restart in Austria, and they've kind of put out a map in terms of where they're going to go in each continent for the months. I think they're aiming for July and August in Europe, and then going to Asia in September, and then the Americas and other parts of Asia in October, November. So as we stand of right now, do you have any insight or any word on whether we're going to get any sort of confirmation of when the season will officially begin?
I think so. I don't have it like firmly done, but from talking to different team members more than anything, if we're going to go racing in Austria, they need to know about 4 to 5 weeks beforehand. Some of the teams wanted to know, they said 6 weeks they wanted to be back at work for. But realistically, I talked to Otmar Zafnauer a few weeks ago, probably about 2 weeks ago, and he said, yeah, look, we're pretty much ready to go. We'd need 4 weeks would be plenty, probably could do it in like 2. I do some work with Honda, and from a power unit perspective, they said we can turn it around in a couple of days, 4 or 5 days, and we can be heading out to whichever venue. Because the thing you got to remember is Friday morning in Australia, no car had run yet, but everyone was ready to go. Cars were built, engines were ready, everything was there, and has since been frozen. So there's, you don't have to replace anything. There's no mileage on any of the cars. From a team, a car point of view, an engine point of view, they're ready to go. So they said, 4 weeks would be plenty for them. So if we're looking at the first weekend of July, then we'd probably be looking in about 4 to 5 weeks that they'd need to know for sure if they're going to race in Austria. But I'd imagine they'd have confirmation before then, because of the way they're talking now. They look like they're trying to iron out things like who gets to go. Some media are saying that they have to be there for journalistic integrity to report on it. And to be honest, I don't agree with that. I think they have to just approach it the safest way possible and the quickest way possible to get going again, to help sort of prop the sport up and give fans something to watch. And I'd be so annoyed if I was a fan and I had to wait an extra 2 weeks because media had kicked off and they were going to wait a little bit longer to host a race until more people could attend it. That wouldn't wash with me. So I think if they're able to go racing and media can't attend, it's a shame. It'll be frustrating, but we'll just deal with that. So I reckon in the next 4 or 5 weeks we'll know for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting you actually bring up that media part of it, because the UFC is currently putting on a card this Saturday, or by the time this comes out, it will have already passed on May 9th, and they're doing virtual media days. So they just have the athletes stand in front of a camera, and they have, similar to how we're doing, connect through Skype or through Zoom, and they're doing their media through that way. So maybe what you're talking about, that could be a possibility where we only have a few journalists on site, and then we have press conferences in a virtual sense in that way.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, they'd have no journalists on site other than perhaps Formula One's own broadcast crew. They might let 1 or 2 of their guys go, because if you have one guy doing interviews, say if Will Buxton goes out there and does the interviews on the grid or something like that, just to get some insight. But they, the second you have 2 people, then you're going to have 2 people plus 2 cameramen plus 2 sound guys, and it just becomes a crowd. So I think they'll have no accredited media going initially, but like you say, they'll do virtual press conferences. So media day that was a Thursday would probably become a Friday, because it's quicker and easier, and they just do some interviews maybe on a Friday evening or a Saturday morning even. Schedules would change because, of course, drivers won't be going off to partner events and things like that. So hopefully, if it does happen, what it would mean is that we get a lot of access after the race, that you'd get Sunday night, everyone talking. They're going to be traveling privately anyway. They're not rushing for set flights to get out of there. So hopefully that would mean you hear from everybody on a Sunday evening through Zoom or Skype or something like that. And then hopefully we get some good reaction if there's been a good race to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of when we get the season started, if we get the season started, how many races are they roughly aiming toward? We've heard anywhere from 10, from 15 to 18. So in ballpark range, what's the amount of races that they're aiming for in 2020?
Right now, if you ask Chase Carey, he'd definitely say 18. It'll be the upper level is what he wants to try and do. And it's because you can't turn around yet to certain countries and say, well, you can't host one, or we're not going to try and host a race with you. So you are trying to see if it can happen. And it's when it physically can't is when they'll start to drop off. So I imagine the calendar they're putting together right now will have in pencil about 18 races. And it's because some of them do make sense. I mean, you compare Bahrain and Abu Dhabi at the end of the season as a back-to-back. That's minimal disruption, easier travel by then, hopefully, and the locations make them quite easy to pair together. You can have a race, a region of races in Asia. Vietnam we need to go back to, China we need to go back to, or they're aiming to. And they're working very actively, because these are places that have spent a lot of money to try and host them, invest a lot in the sport. But for China's point of view, they need to show that as a country it's improving and it's able to host things again. So they will invest. They will spend a lot of money, I think, to try and have F1 there. And from Vietnam, it was going to be their first race. So they've built up to it, spent all the money preparing for it. They really want to see that happen too. So there are a lot of venues that are trying hard to do it. And I saw a tweet last night that Monza, obviously Italy's been the centre of the outbreak here in Europe, but they tweeted that their date was the same date as it was previously, confirmed. Now, it's not official from F1's end, but internally they must have been told something. So they're still trying to put on, I think, as many of the races as close to their original dates as there were, and then just fitting in some of the extra ones. But they give the window of 15 to 18. I think we're definitely more likely to see something nearer 15. Once it goes much lower than that, I think is when it starts to cost more money to Liberty, in the sense of the broadcasters pay to cover the season, and they have a minimum amount of races. And I think that's individual deals will be different. So, Sky might say, this is an example, but they might say it has to be 14 or 15 races minimum. Someone else might say it has to be 12. I don't know. But once you do start dropping below 15, I think you're at risk of having to receive less money from the broadcaster for the season, which obviously is not good right now based on how little money's coming in.
Yeah, we'll want to get to the financial part just a little bit later, but it's interesting because Shaker and I last weekend, we were talking with some of the other guys in the UK about potentially which races could hold. We were kind of comparing certain countries in terms of how hard they were hit by the whole virus, and I found it was really interesting that Monza said that they're going to hold the race the same date, no changes. We can assume it's with no fans, of course, but I found it interesting that, for example, like the French GP was just canceled altogether, but Italy and countries like Spain seem to have been pretty ambitious in terms of wanting to host the race. So we have those tracks, but then I'm also hearing that we might have some non-2020 tracks that might be hosting events as well. So can you elaborate a little bit on that, and maybe which tracks in particular?
Yeah, so I think Hockenheim actually came out publicly and said we've been approached. We've had some talks with Formula One already. There's some other venues that have been willing to say that they're ready to host a race or could host a race, but that doesn't mean that they've had talks. So Imola, I think, said similar, and everyone would love to see F1 back at Imola, but I don't think that means they've had chats. I think it's almost their way of saying to F1, come and talk to us, we want to host a race. And so it's a little bit cheeky in a sense. The same with in Portugal, Circuit de Algarve, that's now got homologation to host F1 races, and that's a great venue. So there's a few more. They're going to be European based because it'll be early on when you can't have fans, when travel's difficult. If you can keep it European based, you can have a few more races. That's what they'll be targeting. But part of it comes down to whether F1 is willing to sort of take any risks anywhere, and it shouldn't be at the moment. After what happened in Australia, they've got to be very careful. So they've got to go to places that they know they're going to be pulling it off and pulling it off safely. And that means a new venue that you haven't raced at before might be a bit risky because you can't go do a recce quite now, and you can't check everything. You're not aware of the area and the region quite so well compared to a venue you've used recently like Hockenheim. So that's why some of these are being talked to. Also, just to explore the avenues in case something like with the French Grand Prix, that was because the president said, no, we're not going to have any mass events where there's a gathering of people until I think the end of August or maybe even later, and completely ruled out the summer for the French Grand Prix to happen. And I think it basically went beyond the point where if we were going to have a season, they'd have probably looked to have left Europe already. So that was just government advice that ruled that one out, rather than F1 saying or the promoter saying that they didn't want to host it. So that's why it kind of fell that way. But also now the race hosting fees are different, if they're going to be any at all. So places like Imola, places like Hockenheim that couldn't afford to put on an event because they weren't making enough money. Obviously, that was also related to fans coming in, how much they could spend, where they could stay. Do you have the infrastructure around the circuit to host up to 100,000 fans? You don't have that problem when you're having a race behind closed doors. So it becomes much more simple as, can we fit all our cars on there and a skeleton crew, and can we go racing safely and broadcast it? That's what you have to worry about. So that's why there's more options now.
Very interesting. And for us, obviously being in Canada, we're very kind of looking closely at the Canadian Grand Prix. Obviously, it was postponed from the June 12th to 14th date. And then when I looked at the map of what F1 put out, they said that they're looking at the Americas and Asia in October and November. And anybody in Canada will know that October and November, we could get anything from sun to snow to ice to whatever. So
yeah, we got snow today.
Yeah, it's what is it today? May 8th? May 8th? Yeah, May 8th, and it's -6 overnight. And like Shaker said, we're getting some snow. So it can get crazy. And it's May, right? So in your opinion, do you think that they're going to try and squeeze in the Canadian Grand Prix? Because a fall setting in Montreal, it would be beautiful, but weather conditions are a whole nother story. So could they just be canceled altogether for 2020?
It's a weird one because I always find this strange about Formula One. I don't get why we're so precious about the weather, because the best races happen in the wet. So if you go somewhere where it's more likely to be wet, so what? I understand if you're going like monsoon season somewhere, then you might not be able to drive a car. Similarly, if you went to Montreal in December, likelihood is it's going to be an ice skating rink that you're racing on, and that's not going to be safe at all. But I don't think having it colder than we would like and wetter than average is actually a problem. I think it's great. So I feel like we should test these things a little bit more. And I do wonder if this will be the scenario where they'll look at that. If we had Canada, I think it would be the first one on the sort of Americas section. So it would be Canada, then Mexico, then Austin, or then Austin, Mexico, whichever way around they want to do those two. And I do think they'll look to fit it in. I saw, I think it was on Reddit, that ticket holders got sent a survey saying about their thoughts of having the race in the fall. So I do think it's something they are looking at, but you're right, it's a very small window. It's going to be pretty much guaranteed to be October time, and it's whether they're willing to take that risk. But given the current circumstances, I think they'd say they are willing to take that risk. If there's value in it for the promoter, if there's value in it for the teams, and there's value in it for F1, the teams aren't going to go there and complain about the weather. If they've been given the option and been said, look, this can earn you a bit more money and you need it right now, so shall we give it a go? And who knows? If you do get a great race, and it's teams will have to adapt, they'll have to work out how to run their cars in colder conditions, perhaps. But they run them in extreme heat conditions or altitude. It's just another test, and that normally throws up variables, mix up a race. So I'm all for it, even if hopefully I'd get to go, even if I'd be freezing.
Yeah, you probably would be. Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting. I didn't actually think of it that way, but because I remember, I think it was 2 years ago in Barcelona for winter testing, it snowed one morning, and it was very cold, and we could get similar conditions that way. So yeah, I did fill out that survey from the Canadian Grand Prix promoters, and they were sort of asking questions. As a fan, would you feel comfortable with this? What would you like to see? It was more just kind of questions in terms of sanitization and if they were to hold a race. So they were asking those kind of questions, and just to kind of give some people some backstory, Quebec was kind of one of the more harder hit provinces in Canada in terms of the virus outbreak. They had sort of a lot of deaths in the long-term care homes and things like that, but I'm assuming that probably by October we'd be opened up, because we're slowly starting to open things up here as well in Canada. So possibility that fans might be able to come there. But yeah, interesting. I think that a cold or a somewhat of a snowy, wet weather race would be interesting in Montreal for sure.
Yeah, I'd be keen for that. I did an interview with the photographer I was saying that I was chatting to a bit earlier, and he shoots the WEC, and he was talking about the time he went to Spa for the 6 hours when Alonso was racing for Toyota, and it snowed properly. Right. He actually put it, it's a guy called James Moy, put it all over his Instagram, so it's at F1 Photographer if anyone wants to look it up. But he put it up recently, a bunch of pictures on his story of him like freezing in the snow, pit stops in the snow, like the cars going up Eau Rouge in the snow, and it was heavy snow falling. Obviously the track was warm enough given the running that was going on that it didn't stick to the track, but you're talking like really thick snow falling, and it looked incredible. They got the race done. You just adapt, so I'm all for it.
Kind of want to see that more now than I do. Just want to see like.
Yeah. Well, was it also in Barcelona that same year that I think it was Racing Point that put out, I don't know if it was a meme or if it was real, but they had the tire with the spikes.
Yeah,
I don't know if you guys remember seeing that. If that was real or not.
It was fake, but we've had that before. I remember actually a chat I had at testing once, so it wasn't snowing this time, but it was in Barcelona, and it was when Caterham were in the sport, and I was talking to their head of communications, and he was saying it's when they had an exhaust that looked like it was illegal, the way they were running it, but it was pre-season testing. So I said to him, I was like, people are asking about the legality of this. Is it because it's testing, are you fine to run it? And he's like, yeah, it's pre-season testing, there's no rules, we can run a snowplow on the front if we want. I remember thinking that and being like, well, here we go, let's just add that to the regs. If we get a race where it's really bad, we'll have snowplows on the front wing. Perfect. Imagine the spray, it'd look incredible.
That means we'd get like 10 races a year over here. It'd be perfect.
Oh, I'm down for that.
Yeah, at this point, anything that involves Formula One racing. Yeah. So we were talking about the financial part of it earlier, how journalists were affected and photographers and everything. But now getting onto the teams, like this is such a crazy time in terms of sport just shutting down globally. I think they were throwing around some numbers of billions and billions of dollars being lost just in sports alone. So in terms of the teams, the 10 teams that we have, are we at risk of losing any teams going in the future? Will the teams be able to recover from this whole mess that's been going on?
So To answer the first part first, yes, we are completely at risk of losing teams. But to answer the second part, yes, they can recover too. It does depend on how the sport reacts as a whole. Now, the budget cap talk, that's been sensible. I think not enough's been made of the fact that we've delayed the new cards to 2022, because a big problem originally was that the 2021 car would have been delivered this year and all the teams were going to be doing this with no restrictions on spending this year. So they've gone crazy because then the restrictions hit next year. So that first car you put out was going to be the most you could ever spend on a car, again in Formula One. So that saved them a lot of money by pushing that back and freezing stuff. So you're essentially now looking for a much smaller budget just to keep the team ticking over for the next 12 to 18 months almost. So that's a good thing. But the teams are getting no income right now from F1. The accounts came out yesterday from Liberty Media for Q1, which was only up to the end of March. So there was only 2 races in that period that should have happened. And obviously they didn't, but it meant that their revenues for F1 were down 84%. It was something like $246 million down to dollars. This is down to 30 something million. So it was a huge hit, and it means they've paid the teams nothing. There've been no advance payments to the teams. So they're definitely going to need help, and Liberty are going to be willing to help, I think, if teams are going to go to the wall, but they're also not going to, put themselves at risk by doing that. So there's only going to be certain amounts of help, and what the teams need to see is that if they can get through this period, that it's a much better future for them. If they're going through it and in 12 months' time they're still someone like Williams, Williams do need money, and if they still need and have a big need of money in 12 months' time, then why are they doing it now? What are they desperately clawing their way through and probably taking on debts and risks and selling things off to be in the same position in 12 months? They need to do that in the knowledge that things will get better. And that's the bit that F1's really trying to work on at the moment. And that's where you get this kind of tension, I think, between the bigger teams and the smaller teams, because the bigger teams have made big concessions and it is damaging to them, but they still are going to be operating at a level far above what the smaller teams can do, because with the lack of income, the smaller teams have becoming even smaller. They're shrinking. So, it does need some pretty serious concessions from the big teams to make sure that we keep all 10. And we do need some racing. As much as Liberty admit there's a chance we don't get any this year, if the global situation worsens again, say everyone comes out of lockdown and there's another spike and we can't get any races in, then I do think I'd be amazed if that happened and 2021 came around and we still had all 10 teams.
Yeah, I remember back in Australia, you were one of the main journalists that were saying that you'd find it very difficult to believe if they canceled the whole season altogether, because obviously it would be a ton of losses there. So maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think are the chances that they just say, you know what, we're going to cancel the entire season? It's just too much trouble to try and figure out where we're going to go and where the races are going to be. What do you think the chances are that they just cancel it altogether?
On a scale of 1 to 10, 0. I just don't see them doing it at all. It might be that the situation overtakes them and we can't get racing on, but up until the 31st of December, they'll be trying to find a way of holding some sort of event that will make money and get these cars out on track. So I'd be, there's no way they're going to completely write it off. And someone like Bernie Ecclestone's been coming out and saying, oh, that's what I do. And he wouldn't. 100% he wouldn't. But he can say that now because he's not in control anymore, and he knows how hard it is for the people that are in charge because it's out of their hands. And I don't think Liberty have done everything brilliantly in their time in F1 so far. I've been a fan of theirs in general, but there's a lot of things that haven't quite worked, and the handling of Australia was terrible. But they are certainly right to be ploughing ahead, trying to cram in as many races as they can. Because if you don't try that, then you're never going to hit that number. Now, I don't think even they expect to hit 18. They want to. They're going to try to. But what they do know is by doing that, they're going to get in as many races as is physically possible. Whereas if you go, all right, we'll write it off, then you've given yourselves no hope of having any events. Or if you say, we're just going to try and fit in 10 or 8 because that makes a championship. But what if you could have got 10 in or 12 in? Then there's a load of money that's been missed out on that could save the teams. So, they've got to take that approach.
And at the end of the day, I mean, who makes the decision when in terms of, like, let's say the Austrian race, for example, July 5th? Is it the FIA? Is it the FIA and F1 in coordination with the governments of that specific country? I mean, altogether, who makes the final decision on any race going ahead?
It will be the government, actually. Right now, I think Formula One and the FIA together, if they're told, yes, you can go and do it, then the FIA are like, fine, you organise it. Yeah, we'll make sure it runs safely in terms of on track. That's their role. Formula One will then go and spend the money they need to spend to get everyone out there on private jets and arrange private transport. Because this is what they're thinking of doing. People get tested before leaving. Once they've got the all clear, they're on private transport to an airport where they fly on a private flight out to Austria, because there's an airfield right by the circuit, and we're talking 500 yards away from the entrance to the track.
Wow.
And then they go on a coach to a hotel that'll be just for F1 people. They'll be tested again while they're there. They'll then go into the circuit on a private coach again. Everyone will be sort of shuttled around in private, essentially. Now, that's all doable from F1's perspective, but only if they're allowed to fly people out there and book those coaches and things, and that will come down to the local government. And if the local government will want it to happen because it reflects their country in a better light, that yes, things are improving, we've dealt with this crisis quite well, we're opening up again, it's actually a really important marker to start hosting some form of event. But if they do it too soon and they start, there's an outbreak again because of it, then they're going to look stupid because they allowed Formula One to come in and potentially influence that. So it's all about doing it safely, but that's why it'll be the government's call. And if they get the green light from the government, then F1 and the FIA will be all systems go.
And do you think that maybe part of it also will help Formula One? I know I heard that Bundesliga, for example, are looking to resume in a few weeks' time. Of course, I mentioned before, UFC is hosting a bunch of events in Florida in the coming weeks or so. So do you think that maybe if other sports leagues can show that they can hold events safely, of course, without any fans in the beginning, that maybe F1 and other governments would be more willing to proceed ahead, knowing that, okay, we can do this safely?
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right to actually reference the Bundesliga. That's going to start, I think, next week, in about 7 days or 8 days, which is exciting because there's going to be some sport to watch. I think the K-League in Korea football started today. So there are things that people now can see how it works and learn from it and get a bit of a blueprint. But I think the proximity of Germany and the Bundesliga to Austria and the Austrian Grand Prix is actually crucial. And if big events can be held in Germany, then there will be lessons that can be learned from that, from a safety point of view, that Formula One will then implement to make sure Austria happens. And if that then happens, again, you've got a blueprint. Use that at Silverstone. You can use that maybe in Hungary, which looks like it's going to still try and happen in August at some point, but they've got certain deadlines the government are imposing. But once you've got those blueprints that show it can happen safely, aided by the sports as well, then the governments are more likely to let them happen. So you might have to take it to somewhere where right now says you can't have a race. Like you say, France has already said they're not going to do it, but imagine that was maybe more up in the air. If you could say, look, we've had it safely in Austria, safely in Silverstone, let's have a race in France at the end of September, then they're more likely to say, yeah, go for it. You've proven you can do it. So that's what you need these other sports to do as well. And from a racing point of view, obviously, it looks like NASCAR, I think, next weekend, they're going to give it a go. IndyCar are going to be doing it in about a month's time, early June. So again, these are things that will have happened with a good lead time, good 4 to 6 weeks before F1 needs to go racing, that F1 can then learn from.
Yeah, no, that's a good point for sure. I think it was June 6th for IndyCar at the Texas Motor Speedway.
Yep.
Texas is opening up pretty rapidly. So, and one of the final things sort of on the whole lockdown situation was just driver contracts, for example. Silly season was anticipated to be pretty wild this summer with all the drivers out of contract heading into next season. So how does that affect for 2021 and beyond? And then the other part of that question is for example, Aston Martin, who were supposed to come in 2021, and I believe are still planning on coming in as scheduled. So how does it affect that side of things, like sponsors, for example? Williams had a bunch of new sponsors come onto the car this year and other teams as well. So first, how does it affect the driver contract situation? And then the other side of business, which is sponsors and different things like that.
So the driver contract situation is quite interesting because I think as it stands, we've had no announcements of anyone else extending a deal or anything like that. Everyone's sitting and waiting to see how this year plays out. And not based solely on competitiveness of their car, but just because they don't know, if you sign a contract for 2021, you don't know sort of what Formula One will look like in 2021. So they're waiting for that to sort of settle down. I think the big difficulty is if we have any races that run into January, which has been mentioned as potential, but contracts will end at the end of December. So there will need to be initial negotiations with drivers that just say, look, we're going to add a month on your contract. But that will be simple because that's going to be the same for everyone, unless two teams can agree they're going to swap their drivers in January, then which would be pointless realistically. Then everyone's just going to say, look, January 2021 essentially is the same as the rest of 2020, so everything just gets automatically extended. But I think we're going to be waiting till racing restarts before we start getting contract movement. There will have been talks going on. I'll be amazed. I mean, Lewis Hamilton looks like he's somewhere in Asia, I think, at the moment. So he's probably not been talking too frequently with Toto Wolff about his deal. But it sounds like Seb Vettel's been talking to Ferrari about his a little bit. There will be groundwork done, but I don't think anyone will make any decisions until we get back racing again. And it will just mean that driver market that we're used to seeing explode kind of in the summer and maybe even over the summer break will be backloaded, and it'll be more like September, October before people start doing it. But it's because right now there's so much uncertainty. It's normally people want certainty in their lives in terms of, I want to sign a contract for next year and know what I'm doing and where I'm doing it. But because the sport itself is so uncertain, I think that's been removed a little bit for all the drivers. So they're willing to wait a little bit longer. So we could still have a great driver market. It will just be later in the year. I'm hoping we do anyway, because it was going to be a great storyline with all the drivers that were out of contract. For teams, you're right that I think there's going to be some sponsors that are kind of trying to ride it out themselves and probably aren't paying quite as much because they're not being seen on the side of a car. But essentially, if F1 can cram in enough races over the year, if they signed a contract that said that team will race in at least 15 races in 2020 and F1 can put on 15 races, then they should get their money. That's another reason why they're going to want to try and get as many races in as possible. That way helps the teams too. So some of them I think will be a little bit damaged by it, but on the whole, because this isn't just F1 having a crisis, this is the whole world having a crisis. I think teams are probably being kind of respectful to their partners and understanding, okay, look, we're not giving you the value you were expecting, but the partners are similarly going, well, okay, it's not your fault. So I don't think it's going to kill any relationships there. It just might be some renegotiations are needed in terms of how much is going to be spent.
Okay.
And I feel like there's one other part, and I can't remember it because I was rambling.
No, it was great. I think I just mentioned Aston Martin. They're still planning to come in as they were.
Yes, yeah. So I spoke to Otmar Zafnauer specifically about that the other week, and the problem they've got is they can't build their factory right now. So they've done a lot of the planning. They then redid a lot of the planning work for the new factory once Aston Martin was definitely going to be involved, because they wanted to make the new Racing Point factory, which will become the Aston Martin F1 factory, reflect the Aston Martin road car factory that already exists. So it's seamless and it's definitely the same company. So they had to do a lot of work for that, but by the time they've planned all of that and had those meetings, this country's been in lockdown here in the UK and they've not been able to start building work yet. So when they originally wanted to get their new factory done by August in 2021, they're now already 2 months behind, maybe 3 months behind. It's going to be at least 6 months later, I think. So they're looking more like the winter to early 2022 that factory will be ready. But essentially for the car, all it needs is, they officially declared to the FIA they're changing their name. They do that anyway. Do that via an email, via a form, and they will have a new livery and a new branding, and all of that you can be doing sat at home on your laptop right now. So that won't change at all. And if anything, they'll be more keen to do it because that's added visibility for the car brand that really needs it at the moment, because no one's buying cars at the moment because no one can go out to a showroom to buy one or anything like that, and no one can drive anywhere. So car sales here were down like 99% in the first quarter or something like that, or new car sales. So yeah, they're going to want that visibility. So if anything, it's probably made them even more eager to enter next year.
I was just about to buy an Aston Martin, and then this lockdown comes in, so I'll have to wait a little longer. Shaker, do you have any final questions for Chris in terms of the whole lockdown situation?
Are you holding up?
Not too bad. Like it gets a bit frustrating sometimes. I won't lie. But I can still go out and have like the old run to try and stay fit. Although I went for one today, and because it is a bank holiday here, so everyone's off. Well, most people are off. I did an earlier podcast and some work this morning. Thought I'll go out for a run now, and it was so busy with other people thinking, well, it's a lovely day. Today's the day to get our little bit of exercise in, and you're trying to make sure you're staying 2 meters apart. It was carnage. So that gets weirdly frustrating because I know I was part of the problem, so I couldn't get too angry. But it's all a bit strange when you go outside. But yeah, it's not been too bad. It would just be nice to be able to kind of go somewhere and sit without worrying about social distancing and stuff like that, and just have some distance between what becomes your bubble. Well, I don't know if it's the same for you guys, but you work from home, obviously eat, sleep at home. You never escape the same four walls, and it's a little bit tiring.
I think the weird thing for me is like throughout the day I'll look outside and everything will be empty, and I'll look like an hour later and everybody all at once will be out for their walk, and it's just packed right away within the hour. Just weird seeing the differences throughout the day when you look outside, and then obviously staying home just gets to you.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Because in one sense, there's so much you can do. Like when I'm not, so I've started playing a bit of GT Sport and doing a bit of online racing. But there's even times I'll come up and I'll just look at it and be like, I don't know if I can be bothered right now. But then I won't do anything else. And normally I'd have killed to be able to be told, you know what, you got loads of time to play some games. But suddenly you just don't have that motivation to do it because what you want to do, you can't do. And if I was outside right now, I'd probably be thinking, I don't play enough GT Sport. I'd love to be spending some more time doing that. But if it wasn't lockdown situation, so it's just that kind of wanting what you can't have to sort of situation to deal with.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you because I know you're a huge sports fan outside of Formula One. I mean, when you were traveling, you go to NBA games, NFL games, obviously soccer as well. So with no sports, like it's for us too, we're the same. Like we love watching soccer and tennis and basketball, and there's nothing on. So I mean, it's just from sports fan perspective, it's like you try and watch some classic races or some classic matches, but you kind of get tired of that as well. And, just on the sim racing front, there's been a lot of drama in the past couple of weeks in the sim racing world with like Lando Norris and Simon Pagenaud and everything. So have you been following any of the virtual racing and what's your thoughts on it?
Oh, big time. Yeah. I'm so missing like real sport that even though I don't think sim racing fills it completely, that's still better than nothing. So I've been tuning into the official F1 events and the IndyCar events to see how those go. And I think I missed the first official IndyCar event and then watched all of them until Indy last weekend, and then caught up with it a bit later. I think we were just doing dinner or something was in the way at the time. So I sort of came and caught up with it. I was like, oh, it blew up a little bit. And then Sunday hit over here and it really blew up. And I think it's the point where a lot of F1 fans were sort of getting very angry about stuff, and not everyone had watched it on the Saturday evening here in the UK. So there was no right reply from Simon or anyone on the IndyCar side because they were all still asleep. But there was a lot of people that got angry on this side who I think didn't have the knowledge of IndyCar to actually at least kind of respect the incident, if that makes sense. Because you love it when, if it happens in F1, you get a controversial clash, then you have two sides to it. But, everyone who's having that argument, they know who the other person involved is. They have a kind of level of respect for who it is. Say it was Vettel and Hamilton colliding. They know these guys, what they do, and they know their histories. But there was a lot of new young fans, obviously, being backers of Lando, who don't know Simon and don't really know IndyCar as well. So there was a bit of an uneven battle going on there. But so I then actually spoke to Lando on the Monday. I did an interview with him, and it was hilarious talking to him about it, actually. It clearly annoyed him, but I think he was surprised at how much it blew up. And the problem is, because there's nothing else going on, people keep asking him about it. And I said to him, I know I'm part of the problem again here, but I'd asked him a bunch of questions about it. And it wasn't necessarily that he wanted to talk about it, but he was happy to once I'd asked the question. He was being polite. But everyone's done it all week. So some people are saying, just let it go. It was a week ago. He's still whining about it. But he's only answering the questions because we're asking. And we're only asking because there's nothing else going on. Right. So someone who speaks to him, say today, nothing else has happened for them to ask you about. That is the last thing. Whereas, as you say, if we'd have been in Spain and we just had Friday practice, something might have happened in Friday practice that is worth talking about or whatever. So that's why that's happened. But I've been following it keenly. I have been enjoying it. But I'm just desperate for real sport to come back. I'm going to be all over the NASCAR race next weekend. Definitely going to be watching that. Although awkwardly, so it's funny that IndyCar's going racing at Texas because my only NASCAR race has been at Texas Motor Speedway about 2 years ago. With two guys from ESPN, we went after the Mexican Grand Prix. And it was great fun, but Kyle Larson stood out as having a great... He won a different race, I think, on the Friday night, and we'd seen what had happened. And then we were there Saturday, Sunday, and watched him, and he was entertaining. He didn't win either race, I don't think, but he had a couple of good runs. Yeah. So I made him like my driver. And another guy he picked, this guy Lawrence at ESPN picked Chase Elliott because he was involved with the Denny Hamlin spat and ran a Hooters sponsored car sometimes. And he just thought that was cool. And I can't remember who Nate Saunders picked, but we all had our own driver, basically. We had to get into it that way. And yeah, so I've always sort of mentioned Kyle whenever he's doing something good, and then obviously what happened with him, and everyone's like, "Isn't that the guy you like?" I was like, "No." So that ruined it for me a little bit. But I'll be watching when that gets going again, and IndyCar as well when that gets going. But just anything really. You mentioned liking other sports. My football soccer team was having a very good season and looked like they could get promoted, and then it got stopped. So right now, I don't know what happens there. We're still waiting to hear about that. But they're only a small team, so the main thing is trying to survive the whole thing. It's just very bizarre.
They're saying for like August-ish, right? July, August, for them to pick it back up for the season. I know that was for some of the news.
Yeah, some of the bigger leagues, I think. But for the level that my club's at, it's 5 levels or 4 levels below the Premier League. So it's quite a long way off. It used to be higher, but we've had a bad run. And they've cancelled the league already in terms of the rest of the season results aren't happening, or matches aren't happening. But they're working out how to finalise the season. So as it stands, we're in the playoffs. The team that wins the league goes up, gets promotion automatically. I know it's different compared to North American sports, but normally if you're in the UK sports lot, we have promotion and relegation, and clubs and teams can move around the different divisions. So the top team go up automatically, and then the next, 5 or 6 fight it out in the playoffs. And we're in that group, but we're sat here waiting to find out if they're going to do the playoffs or not. So it's just so strange because in a weird way, you've had such a gap now. It's the same with F1. There's been such a gap that it just feels... I don't know, you've lost a bit of attachment to it. So it's kind of, you've got to get back into it again when it actually does restart. Yeah.
No, I feel you.
Yeah.
Euros would be starting up in 3 weeks now, 3 or 4 weeks. So
yeah, that would have been fun. That would have been a lot of fun.
Yeah. It was the same way with us. Like, I was following the Toronto Raptors very closely this season, and they were playing really, really well. And like now it's gotten to be a point where I feel like Kawhi Leonard's still on the team. It's been so long since I've seen them play. I'm like, I totally forgot. Like, it's just, it's all over the place. But yeah, the eSports stuff is very interesting. Like, Charles Leclerc was getting involved with it. Even Vettel got a rig, I think, last week and was doing one of the Legends races as well. So it's like you said, at this point, you're just trying to watch anything. And I'll give props to the IndyCar because I watched the COTA race on NBC a couple weeks ago, and it was really good, actually. The race that Lando Norris won, and the broadcast quality and the whole racing and everything. So I was pretty impressed. But at the end of it, I was just like, okay, it's time for real racing now. It's
it
it's
kind
nice
of whet
to see
that appetite.
but exactly.
To be fair, the IndyCar one I think has probably been the best one. The NASCAR one was good too. But F1's obviously done it a different way. They couldn't get all the drivers. They couldn't get rigs to all the drivers early enough. They couldn't get them to everyone just based on their locations. Certain, like Pierre Gasly, he's stuck in Dubai, can't get a rig. So not everyone can get involved. Plus, with drivers all over the world, the connection issues of trying to make sure everyone can race together cleanly and not have lag and stuff like that is really difficult. So essentially, they've gone for people based in Europe only, and then tried to increase the grid with other stars to bring in interested other sports fans. So we've got a lot of soccer players this week. We had golfers, we have cricketers, motorcycle riders, just anyone. I kind of like that approach, but it clearly means they're not doing it the same way that IndyCar did. And I was really impressed with IndyCar, how realistic they made that. It definitely hooked me in as well.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so the final question that we have is just on your podcast. You were mentioning it earlier before. So when did you start the podcast, and how did that whole process come about?
I was inspired by you guys. So to be fair, one thing is I see a lot of other people do good podcasts and who just really commit to it. And my problem was with travel all the time. I was like, I can't guarantee I can do it all the time. Like, it wasn't that I thought, well, what can I say that might be interesting? But I always felt that my position was better a bit like this, where I could provide some insight rather than having to find other people that could do the same, because realistically it would be drivers, team bosses, that sort of thing. And anytime you're traveling and you're away, you can't record audio at racetracks. You can record it, you can't broadcast it. So, when you do an interview with the driver at the circuit, all you can use that interview for is to write it out, unless you're paying millions and millions of dollars to have radio rights or TV rights. So I always felt like it wasn't going to be possible. Then obviously I had a lot of time during the lockdown. I'd had a couple of friends who'd pushed me a lot, saying that I should be doing one anyway. And it came off the back of, we did a racer podcast where we used myself, Marshall Pruitt and Kelly Crandall. So we had F1, NASCAR and IndyCar / IMSA reporters all together just discussing the situation of lockdown. And I'd asked some questions from fans just before we did it to see what they wanted to know about. And we got through one of them. We didn't have time to deal with any because of what we talked about. And I had all these questions and thought we should really answer some of these. So I thought, well, I'll just do my own podcast where I sit and answer them. And then thought, well, just me on my own would be boring. So I roped someone in, Nate from ESPN, who I get on well with, and we just had a bit of a laugh doing it. That seemed to go down quite well. So I thought, well, I'll do another one next week. And it just started from there, really. It's just a product of lockdown. For you guys, your broadcast quality is much better than mine with the mics you've got and stuff. So you've got a much better standard. Whereas because of the situation right now, I can get away with kind of doing it a little bit rough and ready. People are kind of accepting of it. You can do a Zoom call or a Skype call, and people don't mind if I'm speaking to drivers or team bosses that way. And because we're not on location, I can record it and broadcast it. So it's just kind of taking advantage of that. But it has been fun. I've enjoyed it. Just sometimes it's a little bit frustrating because the editing process looks a bit tricky and that sort of stuff. And I've kept it basic. I've just gone, right, start, stop, do an intro, push it out. And hopefully it's just been a bit entertaining. But I know a lot of people are doing podcasts this time of year as well. But I guess if people want to listen to it, they can, and if they don't have to. So I'm not charging anyone any money or anything like that. As you guys have found, it's just a good way of talking about things you like talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I've enjoyed it. You had some good interviews with Lando, like you said, and you had Zach Brown on as well. I think was it last week or a couple days ago?
Yeah, last Saturday. So that one got pushed. I did an interview with Ben Hunt from The Sun, who was on the Netflix documentary on the Friday, which we were going to run, but then I've been talking about doing one with Zach, and I got the green light to do that last Saturday. So that went up Saturday night. I was doing okay, but wasn't getting huge hits or knowledge, awareness of it. And then the Lando thing happened. So 2 days after doing the Zach one, I did Lando, and that one blew up a little bit more. Still, within reason, because there's a lot of bigger websites and podcasts out there still talking to these guys. But yeah, the Zach one kind of then it disappeared under the radar a bit because everyone was just listening to what Lando had to say, and had Pierre Gasly on there as well. So. Yeah, I had three with friends essentially at the start, and then 3 people from F1. So I'm just going to mix it up a bit and see what happens.
Yeah, no, it's great, absolutely. And I like your name. I'm just looking at it here. The podcast that's not a podcast. Very original.
Yeah. The podcast is not a podcast.
Podcast, right. I'm seeing that at the bottom here.
There's lots of podcast, yeah. Because it was, the first one essentially was just me and Nate and a bunch of Twitter questions, and I hit record on a mic and just kind of like, this wasn't meant to be a podcast. It's just the easiest way to answer all your questions is to record it. And off the back of that, it did okay. And once I'd called it that, to put it up, you needed a logo. So quickly did one on this website, and that was it. Once you've done it, you just kind of keep going. So I have to admit already that it is quite clearly now a form of podcast, but it has this stupid long name that, I'm going to regret, I know, but never mind.
It'd be a little bit harder to print T-shirts with that name, but it's
It's not catchy, is it? I can't really cut it down. There's going to be no one who's got that like logo or anything like that. So, but never mind. It's not to make money or anything like that. It's just a bit of fun at the moment, and to hopefully provide some insight. And I'll see what I can do as racing starts up again, if I can keep it running. But if not, there's actually another sort of project, a sort of podcast project I'm working on with some friends in F1 that will be totally different again, that we might do instead. So yeah, lockdown's productive sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes it's like when you're not sleeping in or watching TV, and you get a few things done, so it's good. No, but I'm glad you started one, because I always enjoy your insights in the tweets. And when the whole Australia thing was going down, you're the one that I was following the most, because you had pretty much the most up to date. I didn't think you slept for 2 days in that whole thing, right?
Yeah, that hurt. Yeah, Thursday night through to Friday night, basically. I didn't sleep at all. And then at Friday night, I stayed up again, went and had dinner with a few friends. Oh, no, I went to bed about 8 o'clock, I think, or 7 o'clock on Friday for an hour. Got a power nap in, and I went for dinner, stayed up to go to the airport for an early morning flight. So, it was brutal. But it's because we kept being told stuff was going to come out, stuff was going to happen. Obviously, on that side of the world, with the time zone difference, it was there was an appetite for information in Europe and in North America. So, it was it was a long spell, but glad it's behind us now.
Yeah, absolutely. So just before we let you go, tell the people where they can find your podcast and where they can find your articles as well, and social media and things like that.
Will do. Thank you very much for the plug opportunity. And also, I'm going to keep doing podcasts like this too, because I really enjoyed doing them. So it's not for me to stop talking to other people. But yeah, it's called The Podcast That's Not a Podcast. And it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's direct on Podbean. For some reason, it won't appear on Google Podcasts at the moment, but I just haven't managed to fix that yet. And then my writing all appears on racer.com in North America. And obviously, you can read that worldwide. And Motorsport Magazine in the UK.
Shaker, any final thoughts?
No, that's it. Thank you very much. It was a great interview. We got a lot of information. Thanks for coming on.
That's all right. Thanks for having me. It's always good fun to do. And glad it wasn't quite such a noisy cafe this time, even though I would kill to be able to go to New York right now.
Yeah. What a crazy... Yeah, if you would have told me that when we did that in October, that this would be the next time we would talk, I would not have believed you, that's for sure.
And we'd have had hardly any racing since then.
Yeah, exactly. So, but anyways, man, always great to talk to you. We really, really do appreciate it. And hopefully we'll catch up sometime soon when we find out some other info. And hopefully one day we'll be able to chat in person at a track someday.
Sounds good. Look forward to it.
All right, take care.
It'll be in Montreal and it'll be freezing.
Yeah,
in October.
Bring your snowshoes.
Yeah. I'll buy some. Yeah.
We'll have some ready for you.
Awesome. Yeah, get me out there. I'm down for this. I'm going to start lobbying for it now.
Perfect. So will we.
Sounds good.
All right, man. You take care of yourself. All the best.
You guys too. Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Bye.